Chris Wineland is a comedian who's brought laughs to literally millions over a decade, and he's written for Emmy nominated shows like Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, among others. He's been on Huckabee, Bloomberg, NBC, Louder with Crowder, pretty cool, and more. He's also an author and recently just became a youth pastor. Let's talk about his new book called The Great Heckle. Chris Wineland, good morning.
Hey, good morning, man. How are you?
Doing awesome. Good to talk to you. Now, what is a heckle? For those of us who aren't in the comedian circle, we may have been heckled. We don't know what a heckle is. The title of the book is The Great Heckle. What is a
hmm
heckle?
A heckle is the worst nightmare for every comedian. It's basically the idea of getting up on stage with well prepared material and then somebody in the audience just shouting boo for no reason, just completely like the logic's out of the window and they just decide, hey, I want to mess your entire hard work up. And after a while, it becomes a bit of a thing that you hate. But then there's some comedians that choose to put ourselves in that position just to see if we know how to combat it, because it requires us to how can you still make the room laugh while somebody is literally against you for whatever their motives or reason are. How can you do it? So that's kind of what a heckle is. It's just somebody just shouting against the show that you're performing.
And it's something with ill intent, you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And a lot of times they're not listening, they just choose to heckle. And that's kind of where I came up with the title of The Great Heckle, because the story is about Jesus. And I decided years ago, I've been doing stand up since I was 18. And I realized that I wanted to minister the gospel to comedians, because it occurred to me that entertainers and comedians are the most influential people in the world, right? And yet, nobody's reaching out to them for the gospel. And so I came up with this book as a necessity because I was headlining at clubs and I would hang out with the same comedians all weekend. And you know how that is as a comedian. You're doing 6 shows at a comedy club in this one weekend, and so you're doing 6 shows. You're with the same comics all weekend, so they get bored, and after a while they'll be like, "Hey, let's go out to eat after. Let's go see a movie in the morning. Let's do stuff." So you start talking. And I started to share my testimony, and all these people are like, "Oh, you're a Christian, okay? Let's talk." And I would share my testimony, and a lot of them would be like, "Wow, I've never heard the gospel that way." And so I would give them, a Bible. But then I thought, well, it would be great if they had a resource that they could kind of keep that would speak their language. And so that's when I wrote The Great Heckle. And the idea is Jesus, going with the heckle that we just explained, Jesus has been heckled more than anyone in the entire world. And a lot of times he's heckled and you're not even listening. Like, you're heckling him before you even listen. So the challenge of this book is, before you heckle him, why don't you just listen to what he had to say and what he still has to say to this day?
Yeah, the parallels, if you think about it, Jesus spoke to large crowds of people, like mega crowds of people, where crowd management was a thing. I'm sure there were not people that were like just silent. I'm sure he had, there were
Yeah.
murmurs in the crowd. What's different today, like looking back at how
Mm,
Jesus shared his message with the people then, what's different today and what is the same today? Like,
mm.
we don't live in the same time, but there are some things that are quite similar.
Yeah, there's a lot, and that's kind of how I break it out in the book. Is because this is speaking to entertainers, creatives, pop culture type people, I go with the argument of, let's imagine that Jesus is an entertainer, not in the sense that, because sometimes we think entertainers are fake or flimsy, but some true entertainers, true artists, they want to be cutting edge but truthful. They want to grab your attention for a purpose, not just to waste your time, but a real purpose. And you go, okay, well, if that's Jesus, then he was the greatest entertainer of all time, because he gave truth. He told stories better than any comedian or entertainer could have ever told stories. It was compelling, but it cut to the heart with truth. And so there's a lot of that still rings true to this day. If you read a parable about Jesus, although you may not understand like the sheep and stories of shepherding or anything like that, you're still going to get the injustice that he's talking about and the justice that's needed. And so we're able to kind of do that. I also talk about how Jesus is the greatest improviser, and what that means is in the world of improv, there's only one rule, which is never say no. And
Right.
it
Yeah.
sounds, but you're always supposed to say yes and what that means is when you're doing an improv with somebody, you're making stuff up on the spot, and somebody might shout something like, "Hey, you're eating waffles." Well, you can't say, "No, I'm not eating waffles. In fact, I'm at an Italian restaurant and I'm eating spaghetti and salad." That would totally ruin the entire scene because this person just already said, "Hey, you're eating waffles." So instead, the idea of improv is to say yes and. Well, Jesus always did that with his Father. He was always
Mhm.
praying, and whatever God said, he would say yes to it, and he would walk it out. And so it's a lot of those things that to this day still can ring true to us.
Mm. And people that have read your book and your unique perspective on the gospel, what have they told you? What new insights kind of have you been able to share, like through your own lens of the gospel?
Yeah, I was actually really nervous about that. I was like, I don't know, like, what if I put it out and everybody's like, what is this? But I've had tons of people, and even on Amazon, I've gotten reviews from people I don't know. That's always the best part.
Wow.
Just people all over the country and the world, really, all over the world, and they're saying things like, "Wow, I love this book. It gave me a perspective I didn't understand before. Helped me to kind of see pop culture and entertainment through the eyes of a Christian as well." And that was kind of the other side to it, because I tell a lot of stories of, like, I have a story here about Jerry Seinfeld, and I have a story here about even Bill Cosby, believe it or not. I have stories of Jay Leno and all older comics, new comics, entertainers, singers, all sorts of different celebrities are in this book, and I use a story about their life, and then I tie that into the gospel. And one of the things that ended up being a byproduct of is that I've had people that have not gone to church, and they've read this book, and they said, "Wow, like, I've never thought about it this way, because I was able to use the thing that you used." And it reminds me of Paul in Athens. Paul, and this was my strategy. Paul goes to Athens, and he's not allowed to talk about Jesus, because in the idea market where he was at, there were all these gods, but they were all approved gods. So
Right.
if he would have talked about an unapproved God, he would have ended up in jail. And the genius Paul over here, he looks at one of the gods called the unknown God, and he uses their terminology, and he says, "All right, guys, I'm going to talk to you about the unknown God. His name is Jesus." And so it's like he found
Wow.
his way in,
Yeah.
and it's the exact same thing, because entertainers and comedians, a lot of them are empty, a lot of them are lonely, a lot of them need the gospel. They all do. They need the gospel. And so the strategy was to do the same thing. Take this book and say, "Hey, you guys are looking for the unknown God. I know who he is, and I want to talk about him for a minute."
Mm. Yeah, we have our approved topics that we can speak about,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like as comedians or people that are in entertainment. Like we found that out recently, where
Yeah.
if you're not approved,
Oh yeah.
it might hurt.
Yeah.
There
Well,
are ways, that comedians can speak that other people can't.
I know it's very true. And even on social media, I've heard a lot of Christians be like, "Well, I don't want to post on social media anymore because it can shut you down for different things if you say this, if you say that." Well, it's like even Paul understood the strategy of finding you. The gospel can permeate through you. You just have to find, phrases that they may want to use, and say, "That's fine. We could use that phrase because everything points to Christ." That's what I love. I mean, even Romans talks about that. Every single thing, all of creation points to Christ. So
Mm.
if social media says, "Oh, well, you can't say the word church or whatever," okay, well, maybe we'll use a different word. Maybe we'll use a hanging out in a tent that focuses on God. It's like,
Sure.
who knows? Whatever word, everything still points to Christ.
Mm.
And that's kind of the idea of this book of, hey, there's entertainers, stories of comedians, but they still can, parts of their stories can still point to Christ without you even realizing it.
For you now, as a pastor, I got to ask you: is it harder to
Hmm.
write a sermon or to write jokes?
Well, in jokes, I can use an hour material that I wrote 10 years ago and take it worldwide. Sermons you usually have to do every week, and it's like, don't even get me started. It's
Right. Okay.
Man, it's hard, but my sermons are a little different because I love using my humor and stand up because I
Right.
feel like it can bring people. I didn't grow up in church. I didn't get saved until I was 17. So for me, I don't relate to the old church styles just because I didn't know it. But I loved stand up comedy since I was 8. So it's like, I don't know, I relate to that more. So I get up on stage and I try to do jokes and funny stories and lead that into the message. And it's been done pretty well.
What was the worst heckle that you've ever suffered through?
Um, well, I thought I was going to get beat up actually. Yeah, I was just doing a bar show. This was years ago. And this was just this like little bar show. And this guy kept interrupting over and over and over again, just interrupting everything I said. So finally, I was like, I wasn't even I wasn't even in the funny mode anymore. I was like annoyed. So I
Oh.
turned and I said, dude, I know that you haven't been to school past third grade, but if you have a question, you raise your hand. And it got a huge laugh. It got a huge laugh, but I could see that guy's face. And I couldn't, when you're on stage, you got the lights are bright. Well, afterwards, my comedian friends came up to me and they said, dude, we got to get you out of here. I was like, why? They said, did you see the size of that guy that you heckled? Or, that he heckled you? And I was like, no. And he was standing, waiting for me by the door and towering, massive muscles. And
Yikes.
my friends like humorously took me out the back. And I was like, I think I'm going to get beat up. So, but I'm a polite Midwestern. So while they're doing it, I was like shouting towards them. I was like, sorry. And then I like ran out.
Now, didn't you do comedy outside of a dumpster? Was it a dumpster?
Oh yeah, I've done comedy everywhere. I mean, it was inspired. I did that on YouTube. I did outside of a dumpster at a diner. I've done it outside of a Chick-fil-A, and we've had a few more suggestions to do a few more random places. And it's like, I'll put it out on Google and just invite, or social media, and just invite, hey, if anybody wants to come over. But when we did the dumpster, I specifically didn't invite anybody. I think I put it out for an hour. I did an hour thing and then I took it off. And we ended up, actually, it's not even in the edit, but we ended up with 4 people that came out because they had seen me on TV. And they said, are you performing at a dumpster? And I said, yeah. And I said, but I really didn't want a lot of people because it was my first time doing it. I thought it was weird, but it was inspired off the fact that when I first started stand up, I started in a small town in Ohio, and they didn't have clubs. So I did 200 shows my first year. I was obsessed, but I just picked random places. I went to Taco Bell's and people were eating, and I said, hey, can I do stand up? And people at Taco Bell's, they're like hungry and weird, and they're like, sure, why not? And so I just started doing it. And if I would walk by a restaurant or a party, or if I heard speakers or music anywhere, I would just stop what I was doing and say, hey, I need 5 minutes. I'm a stand-up comedian. I just want to do comedy. And so it kind of was that like grassroots level for me. And it paid off because by year 2, I was writing for Jimmy Fallon. And so it was just really cool how God worked.
That's pretty amazing. All right. So how can we catch up with Chris Wineland online? Give us all your socials.
Yes, I love that. So everything, all my socials is at Chris Wineland Comedy. I'm on Instagram like crazy, of course, because I'm a millennial. And I apologize for being a millennial, by the way. I know we get a bad reputation. I apologize for all that. But no, I'm on Instagram. I'm on everything. It's at Chris Wineland Comedy. You can also go to my website, chriswineland.com. I have been blessed to preach at my new church here in Chicago, which is a Springbrook Community Church. So you can check out a lot of that stuff as well.
Chris Wineland, the author of The Great Heckle. It's available also at his website. Get yourself a copy, digital copy, physical copy, and he'll probably sign it for you if you order it right from him. Right?
I will.
Chris Wineland, been our guest this morning. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.